to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson, and on today's show, we have Fuminori Gunji again. Fuminori is the Global Alliance Manager at Deal Incorporated. He has more than 10 years of experience in new business development, sales in Japan in both startups and large corporations like SoftBank. This is our second episode together, and his first episode was our most downloaded episode to date. So today we're going to dive into creating a workable sales strategy, how to get past the gatekeeper in Japan, and the pros and cons of working with a B2B sales partner. So glad to have you on the show again, Fuminori.
Thanks for having me back. Round two.
Congratulations on being the most downloaded episode to date.
Thank you.
And yes, I think one of the big topics for today is implementing a workable B2B sales strategy in Japan as a startup.
When it comes to workable B2B sales strategy, there's a lot of discussion around sales operations management in a way, and dividing up the roles into inside sales and field sales and that kind of stuff. That all is, of course, extremely important. But the first starting point should be okay, who is the target market and what's the lowest hanging fruit? It's probably a better way to say it. One thing I notice very often, and that mistake happens more often with bigger companies than with smaller companies. But with bigger companies, they tend to talk about, it's a very theoretical approach in terms of, this is the product. These are the pain points that the product can solve. Hence, these are the industry segments or the company sizes that are having these pain points, and hence these are the target customers. And then they think about, this is the total addressable market kind of thinking approach to sales in a way. There's a difference between who are your potential target customers in general or in theory or in long term versus who are the customers you can actually reach out to and sell to in the short term. So there's this book called Crossing the Chasm. Forgot who the author was.
Might be Christensen, maybe.
Yeah. It's a book written by, I think, American, but it definitely applies to Japan. And so one of the core theses, in a way, of this book is, so when you introduce a new product, a new technology product into the market, you can basically segment the market into innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and laggards kind of thing. Surprisingly, that works across all kinds of products, whether it's B2C or B2B as well. And he assigns certain level of percentages per segment. I think innovators are less than 2% and early adopters are less than 5%. And so forth. And then early majority, late majority, as the name suggests, basically the big chunk of the market. And the laggards is also a substantial amount. And the way to sort of do sales in the initial phases when you launch a new product is really go along this line from left to right in a way. So you start with approaching innovators. And when you get customers, you need testimonials, try to get as many testimonials as possible. And the testimonials of the innovators are relevant and useful in approaching the early adopter market because they're very much paying close attention to what innovators are doing. They try to catch the trend, but they're also not as risk-taking as the innovators in terms of they want to see whether the product actually is useful, whether it actually, lives up to the promise kind of thing. So testimonials from innovators are useful in approaching and attacking the early adopters. And what that happens is, that's the basic title of the book, Crossing the Chasm, is there's a chasm between early adopters and early majority, meaning early majority companies, just to give you an example, might be a company like SoftBank or Rakuten, for example. They're big companies, well-established, kind of part of the establishment, but at the same time, they are very much progressively minded, looking forward to adopt to new things and sort of grow as a company as well. They are still usually bigger companies, enterprise level, so they're a lot more conservative than early adopters. Usually, when you sort of scale your business, you jump from the segment to the left extreme to the right extreme kind of thing, one by one. And usually all the testimonials from the previous segment, the left segment, the neighboring segment, serves as convincing reassuring material for the next neighboring segment on the right-hand side, basically. But the chasm is where the user testimonials or, basically the use cases that you can show to early majority in the early adopter segment is not so relevant. So that's usually the place where startups tend to struggle because all they have are the user testimonials of innovators and early adopters.
Gotcha.
And enterprise level companies, especially in Japan, they say, I want to see an example, a pre-existing use case of another enterprise level company in order for me to be comfortable to bring this up to my boss and convince them, hey, this is a product we should consider. And if you don't have an example of enterprise, then, we can't. And so you kind of trapped in this chicken and egg problem. Well, you would be a first case enterprise level. And so the trick here can be multiple. One trick is you tweak the testimonials of the early adopters and innovators, usually early adopters probably. What I mean by that is you say, well, it may not be an enterprise level company and you can't show the logo, but the issue that you're concerned about was exactly the same, right? So it may be a different industry,
but it solves the same problem essentially.
Exactly, it solves the same problem. And so you kind of sort of anonymize the testimonial and tweak it a little bit into the direction of, well, they also had to, deal with this kind of volume, or it was certainly like, a kind of volume that cannot be handled by whatever existing operation that you also seem to have. So you try to make connections of basically showing like the problems that this pre-existing customer has is exactly the same because they're using either the same tools or they have the same organizational structure, and basically try to show them like what they have in common with the pre-existing customer and sort of tweak it in that direction.
That makes a lot of sense to me because let's say if you're a startup and you have an innovative solution, it's very unlikely that their competitors have also adopted it. I guess if you could frame it in a way where it does solve their issue, it is new, but maybe it could give them a competitive advantage as well.
So that usually works in other countries. In Japan, because the approach is so conservative, the level of interest in getting ahead of the competition in enterprise level companies is weaker than the fear of being left behind the competition. Meaning, when it's a new technology, they're not so much interested in getting ahead of the competition by using the new technology, while at the same time, maybe risking something that works okay so far. But when a lot of competitors are using it, then it works. Then you can use those testimonials and say, well, if you don't use it, you'll be left behind your competition. That works in Japanese companies. But getting ahead of competition is usually not an argument that sort of is effective when you're pitching to Japanese companies. That's very different. And that's kind of related to what we talked about last time, I think. It goes down to what kind of evaluation system do you have in Japanese companies? And surprisingly, it doesn't start at enterprise level, but also like mid-level companies or MN market, let's say. The way to advance your career in a given company in Japan is usually not by taking risks and delivering great performance, but rather to not make any mistakes and keep a sort of clean sheet. And that's more important. That attitude is reflected in the decision making, or what kind of pitch works and which one doesn't. So basically, if you cannot show that competitors are using it, then one way to show it is maybe competition in overseas markets using it. That could be one. But usually that's rarely the case because you're just getting started. So it's kind of unlikely that you already have enterprise level customers overseas. So the way to do it is either you tweak pre-existing testimonials to make it look like closer to their own problem, or you go look for senior external advisors. And so this is something in Japanese you would say komo. What you do is there are a lot of people in Japan who are like above the age of 65 or 60, let's say. They used to work in a big corporation and climbed up the career ladder to some extent and were like director or hombucho level or something. They're doing some kind of consulting work these days, a little bit bored, but they still have like very close ties to within the company, but also to other companies, especially if they were in a sort of customer facing role, right? They have a lot of connections in other enterprise level companies. And so basically you approach these individuals and say, hey, would you be interested in advising, quote unquote, advising our company, and maybe get advisor shares, or you pay them like a monthly fee of kind of like what you pay a legal counsel, like Gomai or Rokumai, that kind of level, right, per month. You ask them, hey, can you give me introductions to maybe do you have connections in this company, that company, kind of thing. And they can get really good appointments to like the exact key decision makers But, again, keep in mind, even the key decision maker, the collective decision making is still a thing. So, but still, usually you would never be able to get those appointments via cold call or just as a startup. But through these external advisors, you can get pretty good to have at least one senior external advisor who has some experience in working at a big corporation in Japan. Given the kind of deals that they could introduce you to, or the opportunities they can introduce you to, the money you pay them is actually extremely low.
When you mentioned like 50,000 or even 100,000,
that's very payable.
That would be like 1/5 or even like 1/8 what you would pay a really good salesperson on a yearly basis.
Exactly.
And they could bring the same amount of leads. I do have one question about the Komon or the advisor. So let's say I'm a foreigner in Japan. I've been here for maybe 2 years. I've been focusing only on my product. So my product's really good. Where do I go about meeting these Komons?
So it's been difficult during COVID, of course, but you can get to meet them in typical like business networking events. I think the right approach to basically make the most out of attending those events is not really look for potential leads or customers, but rather partners and these advisors. And if you take that approach, then people are also much more willing to listen to you because they're not fearing that you're trying to sell them something. And this is like in general, but regardless of whether you think the person in front of you might be this kind of senior external advisor, just tell them, oh yeah, I'm here because I'm looking for some senior external advisors. Do you happen to know anyone? And just let everyone know that you're looking for these kind of senior external advisors. And then at some point of time, some person will come up to you and say, hey, actually, I know someone. Usually law firms or legal counsel people, they have good connections in that sense. So talking to lawyers usually helps to get those interests as well.
Yeah. I think that is excellent advice. Yeah, the lawyers, the accountants, anyone who helps businesses with compliance. They're not working with one client. They could be working like 10 to 50 clients. And they also have a lot of data on like company sizes. So they know who the right matches are. I've been to a lot of these events. It was more, I went to just meet people. Because I was a B2C business, I didn't actually need to sell anything.
Right.
So it was just interesting. But seeing people sell to me and just kind of observing, I think you nailed it on the head. And I think one other tip I would probably add is I always remember the people who would introduce people to you. Meaning you would go to each other, like you would ask them like, oh, what are you looking for tonight? Then as you meet more people and you find someone who matches their need, you introduce them. Then after you introduce someone who matches, they have a good conversation. They're way more likely to talk to you as well.
Yeah, that's also a good point. Someone to talk to get introduced to these senior external advisors is definitely VCs. Because the chances are high that if the VCs have, of course, a lot of connections to LPs, and LPs in Japan are very often big Japanese companies, CVCs. Through that LP path, basically, they know a lot of big Japanese companies and, senior level people. So asking the VCs straight away to whether or not they have invested in you, asking them, do you know some good senior external advisors for my industry or for my product? And that's also a good thing to talk about.
Thank you. You've pretty much created the playbook here. Yeah, I think you really did an excellent job explaining. Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. Regarding crossing the chasm, was there anything else you wanted to mention, or you could maybe summarize again?
In general, your target customers probably can be broken down into several segments, whether it's in terms of size or industry or other features. And what really works well is, this is something I learned at SoftBank actually, is so you try to carve out and define your own segment and basically gain a lot of market share in that just one particular segment of all the potential customer target segments, right? After you think you have a lot of customers in that particular niche segment, you can go ahead and say, we are number one in this niche segment. So if you can claim to be number one, no matter how small the niche segment might be, that's a great way to attack the next segment, the other segments, because people want to work with products that are number one somewhere. And so SoftBank was super genius in that kind of marketing. They always claimed to be number one in something. And there was a lot of criticism of like outsiders or competitors who say, yeah, but they came up with their own market segmentation definition in a way, but who cares? I mean, first of all, it wasn't logically wrong to segment the market in a non-traditional way. It's not lying. And it's true in the sense that if that kind of segmentation, that kind of definition is appealing to other segments, then what's wrong with that? It's not like market segmentation is not carved in stone. So you can define your own segments and say, maybe you are number one app among foreigners in Japan, or your number one app or product in whatever, like certain industry of certain sizes, SMBs for like adding more and more filtering conditions and say, yeah, I'm number one here. I mean, you shouldn't do it too often, but can be cheesy or sort of a little bit suspicious if you put it like big on your LP. But it's definitely something you can put in officially, let's say, or non-publicly in sales decks, and sort of where you have the chance to add more context and explanation to it. Become number one in one segment and then move on to the next segment saying you're number one in this segment. And if you're number one in a certain segment, that's also good for partnering strategy, because people want to partner up with the industry leaders or market and segment leaders. So you can say, I'm number one in this segment. There's probably some companies who are not your competitors building some other product, but who would be really interested in entering the segment where you are, quote unquote, number one. Creates a lot of partnership discussion opportunities and say, hey, why don't we enter into a mutual customer referral agreement? Because we can deliver a lot of customers that you really want to approach. Ideally has a lot of customers in the segment that you would like to approach, but you don't have a lot of existing customers yet. So in various ways, it's very beneficial if you can redefine yourself as like, we are number one in this segment.
Yeah, I think your advice is really solid. As a startup, the biggest thing you have to be concerned about is obviously money, but time. Focusing on the right segment, then moving on to the next segment is a solid. And I did use a similar strategy for my advisory services. Go with the lowest hanging fruit. I created a large language school chain. So my first client should obviously be language schools. And so the innovator, I wouldn't say it's innovators, but I got around 10 clients there very easily. Say the early adopters were people who know me like in marketing channels, help them out, solve their problems, got the testimonials. Then for the early majority, I'm using this podcast. And I'm leveraging the testimonials and the experiences of helping, I'll say probably like 6 different industries, but helping them with like sales, helping them with management. And I'm able to now use these case studies to show the other customers that even though I come from this one industry, or I come from this one segment, language education, I've actually helped marketing agencies. I've helped a SaaS company. I've helped an e-commerce company. Therefore, I can help yours.
Yeah, that's the plan.
But for that first segment, it was how do I get that first segment? What do people really want? What is the easiest thing to sell? And it was local marketing. I can get you on Google Maps, top 3. I've already done it for 15 clients, even in Tokyo. I can help you with the SEO, so it's easy sell. Then I can go to my true passion, which is helping an entrepreneur who wants to double their company size year over year, and they need to have 1 session a week. I'm also using that, and I'm right about to hit the early majority.
Right.
That's actually the hard part. And so hopefully the podcast and let's say my seminars, people hear me so much that even though I might not have a similar industry client, they hear my voice enough to cross the chasm.
Yeah.
Then after that, it'll be just like, hey, actually, I'm full. I can't take any more people. So I'm getting near to the early majority and getting like at full capacity. So I just want to provide a real life example.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect example. Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, like in my experience with OneCoin English, like, just the right business model or the right target, like it'll just save you so much time in the future. So what Fuminori said, you target the right segment, you smash it out. That is a very effective scaling strategy. And so I guess, next one is what would be a workable B2B sales strategy for a foreign company entering Japan?
The obvious difficulty of entering Japan as a foreign company is you don't have a network of people from previous jobs, so your college or whatever, you don't have these ties, right? You don't have these connections, so that makes it really difficult to enter any like one country. But however, depending on what your country of origin is, there's usually a local community of expats from that same country. I would say that's the starting point. The good thing is if it's Europe or North America, then the English community is usually almost everywhere existent, and including Japan as well. So the English-speaking community, basically what I'm trying to say, is probably a good starting point. If you already have a business that you've built in your home country, then you probably have some testimonials or some track record that you can communicate without changing the language, basically in English, to this expat community in a way. And because they usually consume the similar kind of media and content on a daily basis, the kind of wording, the tone and all that also works with this customer base. And so that's probably the best way to get started. And once you get some of those expat community users on board, the next step would be then to sort of anonymize the name of these testimonials or use cases, but still make sure you keep maybe the company or the job title descriptions. And take those anonymized testimonials to Japanese companies and say, hey, we have customers in Japan too. These are companies operating in Japan and they're very happy with our product, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's basically, I would say, the starting point in a way. One thing that you should be aware of is, and even when then the next step, when you go to Japanese companies, again, start with the innovators in Japan. So those are usually startups, if you're a B2B product, for example. Start with those because they're most willing to, of course, obviously take risks or are very much more likely to like your business model. So there's less convincing to do. Believe it or not, in Japan, cloud services or cloud technology still raises some suspicions among companies because they think, oh, the data is not in my house. If you go to mid-market level, laggards or late majority companies, that's actually a real discussion that you still have in 2022. And just a little segue story here. After MakeLeaps, after we did an M&A with Ricoh, they were selling a lot of accounting software in Japan, like partner sales of these accounting software firms. And I was invited to one of those events where they would basically invite all the product vendors that Ricoh is selling. And later on, I would also get invited to these big events of these accounting software products that are pretty major in Japan. I won't name any names, but really it is one of the 2-3 biggest accounting software in Japan, not cloud accounting software. So I was at that event and they were basically talking to a lot of their partner sales. Again, a lot of partner sales is a big thing in Japan. So it was mostly the people in the audience were partner sales and some, potential customers or existing customers. And they were actually having a panel discussion talking about the benefits of cloud technology and why it's good to have the accounting software. They just recently launched the cloud version because they said 95% or 99% even maybe are still on premise. And so they were actually having a discussion about the benefits of cloud technology in 2019, I think late 2019. And people in the audience were like, nodding with their heads. And I was like, oh my God, this is how far we are behind.
I think we talked a little bit sometimes it's slow to adopt, moving the Japanese market. But what are some common concerns that Japanese companies have when doing business with a foreign company?
Yeah. So one of these things that comes up very often is that the customer support is inferior to the Japanese competitors, Japanese products in general. Inferior in terms of the response is slow. It's more self-service, or even if you get a response, it's very much this is the standard answer and we won't dig into this deeper kind of thing. You don't get customized answers, basically. That's something that they usually suspect because in Japan, the customer support level, customer service level is almost an equal feature to your actual product features. That's how important it is in Japan. So they might like the product and then they make their own understanding based on how you pitch it of how the customer support level is. And then they might say, if that's the customer support level, a lot of customers would rather go for an inferior product with superior customer support. Maybe it's an exaggeration a little bit, but it's almost that level.
So I guess let's say the feelings of being taken care of.
Yeah.
And the relationship can sometimes, I know it's not all the case, but in some cases can trump the quality of the product.
Yeah, I'm sort of intentionally saying it in this extreme way because that's really how important it is in Japan when they evaluate a product or service. kind of related to that in a way, at least from the customer point of view, it's very much related, is how well does the product integrate with legacy systems? And the how well can be broken down into two aspects. One is, of course, the obvious, like open API, that kind of stuff. But also, this is something that a lot of foreign companies don't know about Japan when they come here for the very first time, is something that's critically different among Japanese companies compared to North American companies or even European companies, is that most Japanese companies do not have a strong IT department, meaning the people who are managing or are in IT departments in Japan, very often they cannot code.
Is that the case where maybe it was kind of a new grad who wasn't in IT and they were put into the IT department?
So what I experience very often, especially when I was doing consulting, and it was the consultancy firm I was working for was specialized in doing new business development for big Japanese companies. And the sort of last phase of the project would be that we consultants would do the initial sales on behalf of their sales team. So we approach a lot of different kinds of companies and do the pitch. And because most of the projects were IT products or solutions, I would talk to the so-called IT department of various companies, from manufacturing to whatever, and then I would ask, so tell me about you. What's your background, just to get an understanding of who I'm talking to. And they say, yeah, I used to be in HR last year, and the Japanese companies, they do this rotation thing.
Yes. So that's what I meant by the new grad. Not new grad specifically, but someone working. Coming from a general, but they were put into some department that they don't have experience in, and that they'll just kind of gain experience in all these random departments. And so when they climb up the corporation, they'll have a good knowledge of the inner workings of the company.
Right. But no, not experts. And so when you give those people a technical description of the technical benefits, then of course they won't get it. Or it's very hard for them to get it. And then B, if they say, well, does it integrate with my legacy system? And you say, yeah, sure. We have these open APIs and whatnot. And they say, yeah, but we don't have a team who can do that, who can build that integration even with open API. So the next step, usually what happens is first question is, can you do this for us? Can you do the integration for us? That's question A. And you probably say no, right? And the second question is, well, can you introduce me to a system integrator who works with you, who has experience working with you, doing these integrations, who have a track record with your product, who can do this for us? Or this also happens very often in Japan, is they have a favorite IT system integrator. They say, talk to these guys, and if these guys say, okay, that's a good product, then we'll buy it. I trust their opinion because I don't know, they are the experts for us. And that company probably knows much more about this,
their internal system
and problems themselves, because they've been doing it all through the years without changing the people in a way. So they are the actual key decision makers. So you have to convince your end customers, system vendors, or IT system integrators, the consultancy firms in a way, the small scale. You have a lot of small scale consultancy firms like IT consultancy or system integrator companies across Japan, for better and worse, and you have to convince them. So they just say, okay, just talk to this guy here. He's my system integrator. And if you can convince him or her, but usually him, unfortunately, then we're good to go, kind of thing.
That's very fascinating. I never knew that.
It's also easy for you to talk to these system integrators because they can understand your technical language. So it makes the job easier for you as well. But the whole feedback loop, of course, of the actual user of the product versus those who integrate it, and the distance becomes longer and longer. And that, of course, negatively impacts how quickly you can get real customer feedback.
Have you ever found yourself having trouble creating a business plan? Do you pretty much operate on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, creating confusion and chaos in your organization? If that sounds like you, I recommend you join my Entrepreneur Bootcamp. In my bootcamp, you will set an achievable but challenging revenue target for the current or following fiscal year, and we will create a business plan to make it a reality. See more in the show notes below. And now back to our episode. So in terms of doing sales, you can do it yourself, or you could have a killer marketing, let's say inbound strategy. You could do a mixture of everything. But I think really underrated approach is B2B partner sales. And I think that is one strategy. If you leverage and it works, like, it could skyrocket your company. But could you tell us about the pros and cons of going the B2B partnership route?
So in Japan, in general, and not just B2B tech products, but also, or especially retail, this is a tradition that goes way, way, way back to like Edo era and, like Middle Ages almost, is Japan has this history and network of wholesalers or middlemen, also known as oroshi gyosha or nakaoroshi. And they are the ones who basically control the whole logistics, but also like sales channels in a way. So the pros are that they have a vast network of end customers that they can reach out to, that whether they have built long-term relationships and trust relationships. Many customers, especially when you go to like the majority segment, they have this kind of relationship with like, if they introduce us to a product, then I trust them that they picked a good product, and so I'm willing to buy it. And if the customer would ask these wholesalers basically, or middlemen, what do you think about this product? I got pitched by this guy here randomly, and what do you think? And if the middleman doesn't say yes, then they're less likely to buy your product. That level of influence they have on the decision making.
Wow.
So the pros are, you get a chance to be showcased to a lot of potential end customers. You would usually never have a chance to actually, meet or even get a chance to present your product, especially when it comes to enterprise level companies, but also like a lot of SMBs who are in the rural areas. So if you're in the city area, like Tokyo, Osaka, Fukuoka, I think it's not too hard to approach like SMBs and startups and whatnot. But the more you go away from these urban areas, the more these partners or the middlemen have power, because there's just more sort of long-term relationships, traditional relationships among these end customers. And
Definitely. And I've worked for a middleman in a rural area, and the relationships they had, it's like 30, 40 years.
Yes.
And in some cases, like it was from father to son, father to daughter. A lot of this business just randomly falls on their lap.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you can piggyback on their infrastructure. So that's the big pro. And of course, depending on the middlemen, they certainly have a lot more volume in terms of like potential end customers than you have. So that's one. And there are a lot of cons as well. One key problem is these middlemen, they usually insist on invoicing the customer themselves. Sounds like I kind of virtually hear some question marks popping up in the audience. What I mean by that is, they want the revenue more than the profit. And in order to get the revenue, they need to be the ones who are invoicing the customers.
Why is the revenue more important than the profit? Just like the yearly company revenue targets they want to hit? Or?
Yeah, that's what they want to show, and that's what usually the salespeople are rewarded for. So the sort of kickback incentives, cashback, or that kind of stuff is usually very unattractive for them. They're like, I don't care about that one. I want the revenue. The other reason, which is equally or even more important, is they want to maintain the relationship with the customer, saying, I am the one who has access to their wallet, not you. I am the one. And because they're selling other products to this end customer as well, they argue it's also easier for the end customer because they get basically invoiced by just one company, and it's easier for them to do the accounting in a way. And we can bundle it all in one invoice, and it's easier for the customer, it's easier for us, and it will be easier for you, will be what they argue. It may not look or sound like such a terrible request, but if you walk things through, you'll notice that if you're not the one invoicing, then usually it has an impact on your customer support and success operation or structure as well, because they are likely, even if they didn't want to, maybe sometimes, but the customer will usually approach these partners first for product-related questions because they're used to talking to them and say, hey, there's this product that they introduced me to. I have a problem with this one. Can you help me? Right? And you should know because the partners have a responsibility in introducing the product in the first place. So like, you introduced me to this product, like now I'm this mess, so help me out kind of thing, that mentality. And please complain on my behalf because the customer thinks if I'm sort of raising the concern or complaint, then I'm just one voice. But if you're raising it, I think you have probably introduced multiple customers to this product vendor. If you say it has more weight, so they'll take better care of whatever the request is, or question is like, please fix this, whatever. In a way, it's like almost a democratic system. In a way, like they call up the local politicians, say, hey, say this in Washington, kind of thing, right? And the partner knows that. So even if it's only one or two customers, they say, oh, many customers are requesting this. This is a problem. You need to fix this. So they pressure you into basically adjusting your product roadmap to some extent, that they can go back to their customer and say, yeah, I fixed it for you. Like I negotiated with the product vendor and, I'm your guy, kind of thing.
I have heard of that. Partner sales versus internal product team. I wouldn't say combat. I would say it was a level of frustration on both sides.
Yeah, right. That's a very polite way. Yeah. So in essence, it slows down the information flow between market feedback and product team, right? And
definitely.
And especially as a SaaS company, at least that's the way I think about it, is it's kind of like a living organism where you are in constant exchange with your environment and try to sort of optimize your product to the changes in the environment. And so if the information flow between the environment or the market and your company or product team slows down, that slows down the whole sort of evolution of your product as well. So that's actually a very serious problem. The reason why there are so many middlemen in Japan is probably also one of the reasons why Japanese tech companies have a harder time thriving and growing than foreign companies as well.
Cases where the sales partner, they'll make a hard request for some feature that would take months to build because it's very complex. You need a lot of testing to make sure everything works perfectly fine. And in like some cases, they might not even end up using it.
Exactly. And so one thing is, it's not that the salespeople or the middlemen are evil. It's they're actually being rational in their own regard. Why? Because they're selling other products to that same customer. So maintaining a good face and maintaining this like, hey, I'm your guardian relationship,
the person who gets
works
things
for them
done.
because maybe they can sell other products more. So for them, it works out. The math works for them. But on the product vendor side, you cannot take every feedback at face value. It's critical to sort of maintain expectations and taking a very Aikido approach and saying, okay, we will take care of this, but it will be built into the product map, but maybe not right now, and sort of kind of deferring a little bit. If it's obviously good feedback that should be fixed, then of course you should fix it right away, but very often it's not. And so that requires a lot of good communication technique of the salesperson or partner salesperson in your team to maintain a good relationship and respectful communication with the partner without sort of actually committing resources right away for every single feedback that they come up with. That requires a lot of patience, thick skin, and at least a superficially very humble communication style.
So I'm not sure if you're taking any sales coaching clients, but I think if you do have this problem on the communication end with vendors, getting like a sales advisor, Fuminori, if you're lucky, or someone else who can really tell you like what both sides are thinking, so you can kind of untangle the weeds and not get too hooked up on your own situation, so you can actually work towards a mutually beneficial solution. Had to put the plug. I've just seen many cases where people try to do it on their own. They spend months and months and months. It's like, you could have just had like 1 hour conversation.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to ask, do we have enough time to maybe jump into the gatekeeper just for the first answer? Okay, excellent. So I think a big topic as well is like how to get past the gatekeeper in Japan. And I think Fuminori gave an excellent example of going through the network of retirees who can put you on the express elevator to the 50th floor to the decision maker. What are some other methods to get past the gatekeeper?
So best one was the one that I talked about, like the senior level retirees are very definitely good. Another approach, which takes more time, is you may think these are not the decision makers, but there's pro and con about Japan being sort of collective decision-making culture. Approach just as many people as possible in that company, regardless of their department or position, and befriend them or introducing your product. And it may seem like a lot of unfocused, dumb work, but it works because decisions are being made in a group. You try to basically create a Zion's effect within the company.
Kind of maybe like, let's say if one person mentions it, then another person's like, yeah, I know that company.
Yes, exactly.
And you just
create some
builds
chatter
upon it.
around it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think in English they just say mirror exposure effect. So I have heard that not just in my own experience, but also from like even more experienced salespeople, enterprise salespeople who have been successful in Japan. And I asked them, how did you land that big deal with like, Sony or that kind of level of company, right? They said, well, I just talked to everyone I could get my hands on of that company and just befriend all of them. And at some point of time, one of them made an introduction to a little bit more senior person, and then it goes on, right? It's a long-term approach, but at some point of time, like almost everybody, not everybody, but let's say in a big department can be of multiple people, or multiple hundred people, right? But a lot of people in that whatever department knew you. And it got to an extent that they say like, yeah, sure, let's have a meeting with that guy. I know him, you know him. And then, yeah, sure, not. He seems to be a nice guy, whatever, nice girl, let's talk. So that's the other approach.
Another guest mentioned this, and she mentioned that in some cases, like the department you think makes the decision, actually don't make the decision, and you can get the information of who actually makes the decision. Or like, I think the case you mentioned, it was actually the tech vendor is the one who makes the decision, not this company.
Your product needs some kind of integration, and then whoever the product vendor is who has the legacy system, they might be the actual decision makers. Yeah.
I really like this term that I've heard from Silicon Valley, but they call it long-term greedy versus short-term greedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the trap that a lot of foreign businesses is that they're very short-term greedy. And because they're short-term greedy, they end up actually not making as much money as they could have if they really invested in these relationships. Right. And that once you get these relationships, it scales like crazy. And long-term, you actually make more money. Kind of a trap I fall into, and now I'm aware of it. And that's kind of the reason why I'm producing one episode a week now. I got to be long-term greedy and just keep pounding things out, getting the word out. It does really take time to build the relationships, but it can scale in multiples once you get it. That was a really long episode, but I think it was another masterclass in doing sales in Japan and clarifying a lot of probably misconceptions as well. So I felt like I've grown as well through hearing your experiences.
Oh, cool. That's great to hear.
But you've graciously shared your time with us. Do you have any asks for the audience?
Market environments change all the time. So I'm always curious, like, whether what I'm saying is still up to date. I mean, I'm also so in the field now doing partner sales in a way. So I have my own experience, but people could share feedback of how their sales experience has been in Japan. And, maybe there are some things where they say, no, that's actually not relevant anymore about what I said. That's super, obviously I always want to keep on learning as well. So yeah, any kind of feedback about actual sales experience in the past 6 months, for example, because things have changed a lot during COVID. And I'm curious whether it also changed not only the style of communication, as in you don't have to visit everyone anymore and business card exchange is not as huge as it used to be, but also whether it had some influence on the, let's say, sales channel structures in Japan, COVID and remote work effect on sales culture and sales structure in Japan.
Hey, take it easy, Fuminori, and definitely we'll talk to you again in the future.
Yeah. Either way, we'll talk either in private or as a podcast. Thanks for having me, Tyson. Always good to talk to you. All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.